very much, Mike. Je ne parle pas français. So, sorry. You have to do with my poor English, or you can deal with my even worse German if you like. That's not recommended. All ready for another technical talk? Okay, so this is the graveyard ship. This is where the blood is in the digestive system and not in the brain. I'll spare you the technicalities. I'll try and challenge you differently. Who among you considers themselves a developer? Who is an artist? Very good. Any politicians? Okay. I want you all to become the artists of the second Renaissance. This is what the talk is about. And as that, you will automatically become politicians. But a different breed, I promise. A little bit about my company. We deal with the development not of products, of systems, but of organizations. Specifically those in the traditional industries whose products have been infected by software. And traditional industries have turned around. So from the bits of software in the car, we have the car in the software. And in the talk, the title says, Humanist Perspective of Industry 4.0. But we all know what industry is, don't we? It's this thing that pollutes the sky. Places non-human constraints on humans. But Industry 4.0 is hailed, certainly in Germany, as the breakthrough. Well, what is 4.0 and why 4.0? Well, it's the fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution. The first was the mechanization and the powering of the machines through water and steam. The second phase was the powering through electricity. And the third phase is not concluded yet, but in essence it's not about power, but it's starting to restructure the industry. It's the advent of electronics. To look at the fourth generation, we need to understand what the Internet of Things and Services might be, or as a matter of fact, actually, already is. We already have more than 5 billion devices connected to each other. That is, the devices that talk to each other without human intervention. Devices that might discover each other without human intervention. Conservative estimates say that by 2020, we should have 31 billion devices talking to each other. I don't know what they're going to be talking about. They'll be talking about what Kindle had downloaded, which books. Actually, there's a very interesting little science fiction scenario written by I forget, an American writer for the Wall Street Journal recently. And one line of his story is one father talking to his son. Imagine a time when books in a library did not talk to each other. So this is the scenario that we're in for. Now what does that mean? Well, in essence, really what that means is that the factories that have little bits of software in them that control them, actually the factories will be in the software. And the factories and the logistics will hopefully be self-organizing. Self-organizing systems and connections that we never imagined. That gives emergent behavior. Can we control that? No, we can't. Can we predict that? Even less. Self-organization is so the the solution to this. Rather than we organize that, it organizes itself. And that's a typical view of a factory of Industry 4.0. What do you see? Where are the people? There are none. Why? Actually, this is wrong. This is absolute rubbish. And I can't say that quite that way in Germany, because the German engineering and the manufacturing associations really have said that 4.0 is going to be the industry of the future, and many companies have the directive to present the industry of the future as without people. I would like to turn that around, because we're forgetting some essential elements. The idea is that people get in the way because they need to be organized. Why do they need to be organized? Because they cannot organize themselves. Rubbish. Works. Yeah? Actually, that works not only, this is in Hanoi, it works also in other traffic situations. There are many case studies where big traffic junctions or roundabouts have been converted from being road sign driven to no priority routes whatsoever. That people suddenly have to think while driving. Imagine that, thinking while driving, but the throughput increases and the traffic accidents go down. So self-organization may be underestimated. At the same time, while we're thinking that humans can't organize themselves, we believe we can build technical systems that organize themselves. Yes? Quite a lot of these systems. One very big system was the command and control system that the American defense lobby built for the invasion in Afghanistan. Blew up in their face. Everything being connectable to everything else in a controlled fashion. Well, mathematics shows that complex systems with feedback loops cannot be controlled. But this swarm of intelligent drones is not controlled. It has just rules and they organize themselves. They actually play the bomb theme. You can see that on TED in detail. But we work with these systems, we believe we can build them, but we attribute humans not to be as intelligent and capable as these little drones. Strange. If that is the case, what can we say from a society that will be created by the Internet of Things and Services? What will happen to the humans? Will they all be locked up? Out of sight? Well, it's actually up to us to decide that. It's not up to the politicians. I come back to that. You are developing the technology. What we want is a connected but open society. Another interesting case in point, the first time the term open society was used was by Karl Popper, an Austrian philosopher who had to leave Austria. He left just before Hitler came. But this book that he wrote, a passionate plea for a bottom-up democracy. He took 2 years to find a publisher in the West. No American publisher, a small British publisher eventually published it first. So open ideas are not necessarily received well by those who prefer a more controlled structure. What's the background to that? Actually, we have to look at, in society in general, what is the image of man? And it doesn't look that good, really. specifically in the Western world. Yeah? There is the notion of sin, of bad behavior, and that it is inherent in the human, and therefore needs to be controlled. Well, we can talk a lot about faith and the misuse of churches of certain rules that they invented. But more importantly, if we consider Industry 4.0, the base of the modern capitalist successful society, and I don't doubt it is successful, because the living standard in the world has never been as high. But the essence in what Adam Smith wrote in 1778 was man is selfish, and man organizes himself, he didn't say herself, himself only in communities to further his own advantage. So it's to exploit the others, what the communities are there for. Therefore, man needs to be controlled. We come to this, we need to control people paradigm. Trust is good, control is better. Who said that? Yes. It's very interesting, isn't it? Most of the capitalist corporation function on Leninist principles. Yeah. We need to do something about that. Because otherwise we really end up with a living industry. You see it in the background, nice new landscape. And the machines hold the key to the activation of man. So we need to turn that around. I call it Lenin to the power of -1. And it is control is good, trust is better. Now, is there such a thing in our society? Yes, there is. And actually, there is a foundation for that. Modern neurology shows that we are actually built as empathic beings for community life, to help each other, to cooperate. Cooperation is not out of selfish interest to further one's own profit, but it's our very nature. Have you heard of the mirror neurons? When babies in a ward in a hospital, when one starts crying, the other cry too. They don't have a reason, just that. If you see somebody injured, you feel for that person. We actually have a link in the community. The principle of humanity. Joachim Bauer is a very well-known German neurologist. This book is also published in English, but I couldn't get the title cover. But the basis is we are actually wired to cooperate. And one of the worst things that can happen to children is when they're excluded from a group. So the exclusion from the community actually generates the antisocial behavior. It is not antisocial behavior that needs to be integrated into community. This goes hand in hand with the, actually not too recent, but recently published research on motivation of people in the workplace. Motivation of people in the workplace that have to be creative. So if you're chopping wood all day, this may not necessarily apply, but even that can be questioned. But the fact is that bonuses and other sort of financial incentives do not actually work. Studies have shown again and again that if you give good people a bonus, that perform worse. And this is actually independent of culture. The real motivating factors are self-determination. People have to say in what they're doing. Mastery, they can get better at things. They can exceed themselves. And purpose. To do something that is not just for one's own profit, but has a long value. It's actually value contribution to society. There's a spiritual aspect to that. But definitely purpose-driven is a major driver for the success of organization. Shell did in the 80s a study on how long do companies live. Small and medium-sized companies, about 15 years. Fortune 500 companies, about 40 years. The lifetime has something to do, the expected lifetime of a company has something to do with the way it is run. If it is run as a money-printing machine for the profits of the owners, the lifetime gets shorter. If it has its own right of life and serves the community, the lifetime gets longer. The companies with hundreds of years existence. And these companies, these communities, have been examined in, Eleanor Ostrom researched the life and death of communities for about 30 years. That's what she got the Nobel Prize in Economics for in 2009. And the result is that communities that steer their fate themselves. These organizations are more resilient in case of crisis. They actually deliver better value over time. They don't deliver this speculative peak, but this speculative peak delivers results only for a very small part of the population, and actually a mirror decrease for those who have to pay for that peak. And a lot of the rules that Lady Ostrom discovered for how communities organize themselves, not only in the Middle Ages but today, have been exactly the ones that we find in successful open source projects. Now, I've heard of a little project called Eclipse. Who does work with Eclipse? So, you're part of this open source community. I believe, from what I've seen, Eclipse to be a very successful project. What's the basis of success of Eclipse?
Community.
Yeah. Does the community organize itself? Yeah, so you're at least as good as the drones, yeah? Yeah, one of the key aspects is that it's a peer-based community to trust each other and be open. Share experience and increase the learning cycles. This is very important, this learning cycle concept. Because we as humans, we learn at a vast rate before we go to school. Remember your first time you rode a bicycle? Did it work? The second time? Better? And so on. We learn through mistakes. But we try different approaches. I tried all sorts of things to get onto the bike. The only bike I had was that of my grandfather. And when I learned riding the bike, the saddle came up to here. It was a bit of a challenge, so I clung onto it on the side first. But if your foot gets caught, then you're shagged. Yeah? But you try again. When you come to school, suddenly making mistakes is not acceptable. So different opinions are ironed out, we get an average. Meritocracy has the danger of having that same thing. If only the top guru can decide what the architecture is like, then alternatives will not arise. So meritocracy has to be peppered with something else. And this something else is interestingly discovered in the social sciences by a guy named Richard Florida. You heard of Richard Florida? The 3T theory? Okay. Richard Florida is from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was famous for coal and steel. Once the steel age was over, dead as a dodo. Nothing. There was lots of investment programs to revive Pittsburgh. Didn't succeed. Pittsburgh has two of the best universities in the US, but still no. People get their education and leave. What he's discovered is to actually get an area or an organization to be innovative, it is not sufficient to just have the technology. Well, more importantly, you need to have the people, the talent, that can work with that technology and turn it into something that provides value to society. But even that isn't important enough, because this talent is mobile. What you need is in the area or in the organization the tolerance, the acceptance of people who think differently. Thinking differently. Diversity is the factor in nature that actually lets ecosystems survive. The diversity we need in society to develop. And the diversity also in technical systems, we need to be innovative. So this 3T, where the last T is the most important. And what he came about the theory, our friends compare what are the innovative hotspots. What would you think is in the US the number one innovative area? Silicon Valley, for instance. But the power, all the decision makers and the money sits in Washington, D.C. Why is Washington, D.C. is as innovative as the center of the Sahara? Why is that? Well, in the 60s and 70s, Silicon Valley was where the alternative communities lived. So different thinking is acceptable. Austin, Texas. And you can expand that across the world. He's looked at the sociological composition of a whole range of areas. And I think something holds for this area in that line too. Something goes back to what was before France. But and this is not part of my talk today. What does that mean for Industry 4.0? This human-less factories. Well, let's look at an analogy of how one can actually tackle that problem, or how development actually takes place. So how can we influence the society, or the development of society? Anybody have any idea what the rest of the painting is that this is taken from?
Element dot.
Great. Interesting, actually, the structure of that painting. But more importantly here, this is not a painting. Actually, I like Leonardo da Vinci very much, because he always started things, and then when it was mechanical to finish them, he pushed that onto somebody else. So this painting was never finished. But it shows that the painting is actually constructed. You have the lines, you have the perspective, you actually bring the 3D into the 2D. That was the great invention of the artists of the Renaissance in the 1400s to 1500s. It was very important. You could express reality in a perceptible way. And they really built books of best practices of how to actually construct drawing. So suddenly we get a technology that can capture nature as it is, buildings as they could be constructed, and new things that now nobody's ever seen before, but you could communicate them via medium. It's the first drawing of a helicopter. You have to work quite a bit. Leonardo didn't know that then, but the artists, the first people in every society that think differently, could use the horizontal technology that created architecture, medicine, most of the technical construction. Actually, in the Renaissance, also a completely new finance system was constructed because the previous medieval one had collapsed. Maybe that's another paradigm. So what they built is a universal modeling language. In today's terminology, it could describe what is in nature and could describe what could be. So that is one innovation, but there were other innovations that made this really particularly pertinent. And that has changed us. Because there were other events. There was the invention of the print of books, but the printing with movable letters. Printing existed before, but you had to carve, if you like, the whole page. It was a laborious process, or you hired 1,000 monks and they copied. It's also a laborious process and error-prone. So book print suddenly gives broadcast. If you look at in the years after the Renaissance, the increase of books is just phenomenal. But even more importantly, another communication technology arrived. Paper became cheap. Pencils were invented. So suddenly we have what today we would call peer-to-peer communication. So you can do a sketch, you can write down a note, you can communicate something that previously required physical presence. Now, a communication technology, a set of communication technologies, together with the horizontal technology, this communication technologies accelerated the penetration of this universal modeling language, 3D to 2D, across the society. What is today's universal modeling language? First, Renaissance, I've already said that. Oh yeah, a very, very important thing. Very important thing. Before the Renaissance started, in essence, everything was in a controllable state. There was a God-given hierarchy. Those who were at the top had rights, and those who were at the bottom didn't. So you basically had to subjugate to the higher powers. The advent of humanism and the basis of modern society were created. Now that doesn't apply to everybody, but basically man was put at the center and not the afterlife of man. So today's universal modeling language, what could that be? It's not Java. It's not OSCRL. What is it? No idea? You're working with it. This is one of the mathematical definitions of it. Actually, the original definition of this by McCarthy in 1960. Software. Software is today's universal modeling language. Software realizes what could be. Compared to this modeling language of the first Renaissance, which could describe what could be, software goes one step further in the creative power. It realizes what could be. It doesn't just describe, it creates. Creates new things. That means you're all artists. You know that. You know that there's a quality relationship between the beauty of software and its quality. You heard of the Software Museum organized by Grady Booch? No? You should visit it, it's online. Software created new broadcast, new peer-to-peer, and this machine-to-machine communication, which is the basis for the Internet of Things. More importantly, software democratizes broadcast, peer-to-peer, and first machine-to-machine communication. That means in the first paper to be published in New York in the 19th century took in today's money worth about 30 million euro to start. You can start with very low budget to build a paper on the internet now, and you can't be stopped either. If you think about what's happening with 3D printers, you can imagine what impact that will also have on the manufacturing industry, Industry 4.0. So the emphasis is politics doesn't change society. What then? Technology changes society, and politics follows, if it's good enough. But it always follows. That's why we always have this argument, oh, previously we had the jobs, they all go away. But if you look through history, each time technology has changed a society, there were more new jobs created than were old ones taken. If we didn't have that, we'd still be in caves. Or we wouldn't probably have survived the saber-toothed tiger. Very important, we have had this effect already 5,000 years ago. You know what that is? Cuneiform, first written language, the first writing invented. Why was it invented? The Sumerians had invented interesting technology, field. They cooperated in agriculture. They actually provided regular flooding of the fields. They harvested together. They had common storage for the harvest and for the seed. Now that enabled them to live in cities, but you need to be able to structure that cooperation. You can't just get everybody in a city to come together and say, yeah, how we're organizing that. So they had to invent writing. And actually, most clay tablets are actually store lists. They talk about how much of what is there and what's to be done with it. So it's, if you like, the first set of process models. Yeah? Today's EPF is something like that. So technology that came together then was new technologies in agriculture together with communication allowed the first mega cities to be built. So all over our civilization period, we've had technologies when they come together with communication abilities to provide vast changes in society. The question is, what changes? 1984 like? You know the one, you're totalitarian and you have to report what you're doing? Well, you may have to today as well, but the question is, will humans be locked out of society or will humans be in society? Will it be a human society? Well, that's a question of if we are maintaining an open attitude. And maybe we come to the right city to talk about that. It's all over Toulouse. Yeah? What does it say? Artist comes first. I think this is quite indicative. This art is the way of thinking differently, of reflecting. So, art is creation. Anybody building software creates something new. They should be aware of that and proud of that. So, Industry 4.0 needs a humanist perspective. If we don't want factories without people, if we actually want to utilize the power of the internet to actually bring the creative processes, production process together, what it should really be like. Because with 3D printing, for instance, you don't need huge production facilities. That means that the inventor, the creator, designer, implementer, and the producer come closer together. There won't be that space anymore. Actually, it'll be factories with lots of people and little machines that are visible. That is the vision of the future. That's why this humanist perspective needs you. You need to become the artists of the second Renaissance. You have an open mind, I hope. And the society is a reflection of the mind of its people. This reflection here is slightly distorted. Well, it's up to the mind to change that. And the mind is like a parachute. That's the first drawing of a parachute. The mind is like a parachute. It's only useful when it's open. If you're playing on the word open, but then you are working in an open source project, or in a whole load of open source projects that aggregate under the name of Eclipse. You have a way of working and a way of thinking that is different from most of the people in society today. You have the way of working and thinking of the future. It is your obligation to bring that to the rest of the world. Together with the important part of tolerance. But a working meritocracy wouldn't exist without tolerance. But if that is brought into society, we might actually be able to coexist in the way we should and cooperate in the way we were intended to cooperate, as Bauer, the neurologist, said. So, you can find more about this here, second Renaissance.org, and you can find a online version of this presentation at the link down here, but I'll provide that to the audience. Thank you. Any questions? Any comments? Now that you're all artists?
You said that when technology evolves, when jobs were lost in the process, then more jobs were created after. But it's not because that what happened in the past that it's going to happen in the future.
Well, actually, a very interesting study was published just give it a different perspective on that. There was a study on creativity published by Adobe last year, and they studied, they researched what companies needed. And most companies, over 70% of the companies, were complaining that there wasn't enough creativity, innovation in their workforce, that they needed more innovative power from the people working in their organization. The second part of that study, a different team actually talked to the people employed in these companies. And 80% of the people said their creativity was not wanted, was not asked for by their employers. So we have, on the one side, them saying, we need creativity, we need creative people, we need to fire the people who are not creative out of our organization, which is the implication, and we need to hire the new, young, creative people, which we can't find. At the same time, the people who are in the organizations are treated in a way that their creativity is not utilized. So we have a mismatch, and we have this type of mismatch quite often. It's not necessarily that the people have to go, but the old job roles have to go. The old definitions of work become redundant, and new work is created at a faster rate than you find actually people to take up those positions. There's 80,000 engineering positions open in Germany. Has been for 3 years. All sorts of attempts to fill them. No probability. But it can't. The education system doesn't produce the people. The education system, well, that's a separate story. It's not geared up to actually develop people, it's to produce a certain average. Yes, you're right, it's not guaranteed that that will happen in the future, but if we allow a view of Industry 4.0 without humans to be perpetrated on society, then we're guilty of allowing the speculation of a reduction in labor force. What really the Internet of Things and the Industry 4.0 provides is a platform for creativity, for many new companies to be created. And that's what we need to emphasize. Thank you for that question. So what are you going to do next? Have a break, have a coffee, huh? Thank you.